Since Muhammad was the last of the three messengers of the awakening, he left the Quran. Quran needs recitation and is not like the Bible, which is the sacred text of the Christians based on the Old Testament. The Old Testament was based on the books of the Jewish tradition after the Pentateuch of Moses. Various people wrote the Gospels and Epistles of Paul, which comprise the New Testaments. The Quran was written and recited by one person, Muhammad, who was merely the secretary of a sacred script composed by the author of eternity. We do not know if Buddha ever said, "Here is a set of palm leaves, I wrote down my teachings." We don't know if Jesus ever said, "Here are my teachings, protect them." But Muhammad's whole mission was to leave this one text. The teachings of Christ were first recorded around 40 years after his demise, and the dating of the teachings of Buddha is even more imprecise. In addition, the body of Buddhist scriptures is enormous, just if you count the Mahayana Sutras alone. As vast, complex, ornate, and metaphysical as they might be, they virtually all begin with the words, "Thus have I heard." Is this literature so vast because Buddha left no written text and in time a scriptural tradition began to fill this vacuum? If you contemplate the Flower Garland Sutra, it is as grand, virtually exhausting, and incomprehensible as it is profuse and far-reaching. But are these the words of the Buddha? Or are they the telepathically received messages of Buddha in a super samadhi? Like Buddha, Jesus never wrote anything down. His teachings were recorded by his disciples in the form of the Gospels. The Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke were written 40 years after Jesus' death, and the Gospel of John was written about 50 years after that, with the Book of Revelations. In the book Myths and Message of Jesus by Lisa Spray, there is a chapter called Garbled Transmission that points out errors in the Bible as it exists today. It says these errors are due to 1. The natural changes that take place over an extended period of oral transmission. All Buddhist teachings, for instance, were taught by oral transmission. And 2. Errors in the original transmission due to the lack of understanding Jesus' intent. As a man of history, we can find different biographies of Muhammad where you can trace the detail of his life. In the different biographies, we find that the details are the same. Maybe they have different angles, but the basic facts of his life seem to agree. As for Buddha, all you can say is that he left his family and for 7 years he studied different philosophies, and the next 45 years he traveled around the subcontinent of India giving his teachings. There are many stories of different encounters he had with different people. However, in terms of modern biography, there is nothing we can verify. After Buddha's passing, there was a great council called to write down all of the teachings everyone had ever heard him preach. Nonetheless, one person says he taught this, and another person said he taught that. In history, there is always a great gathering of the people to try, compile, and set straight the teachings of the messengers of their time, such as what happened after Buddha. Still today, you have the Pali canon of the Theravadis and the Sanskrit Mahayanists. The same thing happened with Christ, whose teaching became even more diffused than Buddha's after his departure. Even though Christ left no written teachings and did not call for a religion, Christianity today has 23,000 different sects. Even though Muhammad left the Quran and founded Islam, the people were not satisfied and different sects were created, the Shiite and the Sunnis, which is a major division, analogous to Catholic and Protestant. The Sunnah then formed the Hadith and the Sunnah tradition, based on the sayings of Muhammad and an elaborate system of laws derived from his teachings. The Shiites said that Islam was based on Muhammad's bloodline, starting with his nephew Ali. These are some basic considerations of the lives of the messengers. Some of them listen to you. Then as soon as they leave, they ask those who were enlightened, "What did he just say?" God thus seals their hearts, and consequently they follow only their opinions. Quran 47:16. In this surah, it says that some listened to Muhammad and then asked those who were enlightened, "What did he just say?" It appears this was also the case for Jesus. Was Buddha fully understood? The teachings of the Buddha begin with the Tripitaka, the three baskets. The first basket is the Vinaya, rules of conduct. The third basket contains the Abhidharma, the teachings of the psychophysical nature of life and human perception. The second basket is the Sutras, many of which were not written until 500 years after the Paranirvana of Buddha. In some of those texts, the Buddha does not talk, but other people discourse through his direct inspiration. Most translators describe their work making a translation of the Quran as making a translation of the meaning of the Quran. They know in some ways it is untranslatable, so they always say the translation of the meaning of the Quran. However, we must keep in mind that much translation is affected by the translator's unconscious bias. Everyone has their particular bias. That is why it is important to read different translations. In any case, you can go back to the Arabic to find the truth. In most cases, we find that translators have different interpretations because of the different styles in their language. Then there is the case of intentional innovation, which we find little of in the translations of the meaning of the Quran compared with the Bible or Buddhist texts. There is little way to verify what the Buddha actually taught, that is, what did he actually say. It is arguable that the sutras are telepathic transmissions of the Buddha received by monks in advanced stages of meditation or samadhi. This is altogether possible. The synthesis of the teachings of Buddha and Muhammad is a common context of planetary enlightenment and is the basis of the 21st century spirituality. How can spirituality for the 21st century be considered without Islam as part of the equation? Islam is by far the fastest growing and most embattled ideology or religion on earth today. Why is Islam embattled? Because it chooses to adhere to its non-materialist spirituality rather than accept globalization as the inevitable last phase of a materialist economic dialect. By not seriously considering Islam, we are committing the same biased error that has plagued civilization for the last 1,000 years.